I will now briefly give you the historical context that should have been in Tuesday's film, but isn't. The Western intelligence services have got a documented record of engaging in what is called false flag terrorism. That is to say, where a terrorist attack happens, people are hurt, lives are shattered, but it is claimed in the name of a particular group, but that group didn't do it, it was done by somebody else. It's like you have children in a family and one of them breaks something and says their brother did it. Yeah? Now, in the 1970s, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was an organisation called Gladio, Gladio. If you look it up on the internet, you'll find all of the material about this organisation. It was set up by the British and the US intelligence services after the Second World War in order to try and fight communism in Western Europe. The idea was that, say the Russians invaded Western Europe, there would have to be some kind of resistance. So the idea was that these groups would be the basis of that resistance. And they looked around at who would be the most reliable people to put in these groups, and they decided it was probably going to be the former fascist intelligence networks. So many ex-Gestapo and ex-Italian fascist intelligence operatives were recruited into these groups. Then these groups began, under instructions from Washington and London, to meddle in the internal politics of the countries in which they were operating, particularly in Italy and in Belgium. So in Italy, during the 70s and 80s, they called it the anni di piombi, the years of lead, when the Red Brigades were kidnapping and executing people, the fascists were blowing things up, including Bologna railway station in 1980, which was bombed with the loss of about 83 people, so a bigger bomb than the ones that we saw in London. And it gradually became clear over the years, I won't bore you with all the detail, we can dig this out for your questions if you like, that a parliamentary inquiry established that this was carried out by the security forces, by this Gladio network. So they've got a record of doing this. We said, well, that's in Italy, that's nothing to do with us. No, it was run out of NATO. It was a NATO operation run out of Shape in Brussels. And who heads NATO? The British and the Americans. So when we say this terrorism is happening in Italy and Belgium, the people calling the shots were in Washington and London. This is all documented fact. We're not talking conspiracy theory here. And as I say, if you look it up on the internet, you will find all of this stuff. There's been a very good book written about it by Daniel Ganser, who is a Swiss academic. But there's a very good BBC film, 3 hours long, covering all the details, including interviewing many of the key players, who seemed quite happy to explain what their roles were. It was only shown once on the BBC, in the Time Watch series. And of course it's documentary history we're talking here, not anything else, okay? So that's the first thing I'd like to mention is, why was I suspicious on 7/7 and on 9/11? Because you've got a record of doing stuff like this. You blew up Bologna railway station in 1980, didn't you? You can't deny that. And in actual fact, of course, nobody's been punished, even though it's all come out. That's the way it works. Now, the other big false flag terror attack which has happened in recent years, which people have missed out on and was missing from the film. Do you remember Alexander Litvinenko, who died of polonium poisoning not so long ago? His book, Blowing Up Russia, it's available in the shops. Anybody can go and buy it and read it, and there's extracts available on the internet. He was an FSB agent, that is to say, the Russian Secret Service, and he says in that book that it wasn't the Chechens who blew up Moscow and Ryazan in September 1999, which I call 999 because all the bombs were in the 9th month of the year. It wasn't them at all. It wasn't the Chechens, it was the FSB. And the reason they'd done that, and they killed hundreds of innocent civilians there, hundreds, not just 52 like we saw in London, was because the oligarchy in Russia was about to lose the election, the coming election in November, to the Communist Party, who were quite likely to have renationalised many of their assets. This wasn't acceptable to the wealthy oligarchy in Russia, so they got together with the secret services, blew up lots of innocent people, and then rode Vladimir Putin to the rescue to take over. Again, It's not been proved that this is the case, but these were definitely Litvinenko's allegations, and it's probably those allegations which cost him his life. The Western media has covered these allegations a little bit, but I think they're strangely reluctant to look into them because it's so similar to their own modus operandi. The third major area I'd like to draw your attention to is what went on in Ireland over many years. The Irish police, the Garda Síochána, carried out a 14-year investigation into the bombings of Dublin and Monaghan in 1972. There were two simultaneous bombs that killed about 28 civilians, so a bit smaller than London. The Barron report is now is available. Again, you can check it on the internet. B-A-R-O-N, Barron. Justice Henry Barron was the head of the Irish Supreme Court. He signed off the report, which was put together by the police, and that firmly points the finger at the British intelligence agencies for bombing Dublin and Monaghan. Yeah? So the British have been caught bombing Bologna, Dublin, Monaghan. The Russians have bombed Moscow and Ryazan. This is all these false flag operations. Many of you will probably never have heard, but I'm now going to mention his name to you, a chap called Brigadier Gordon Kerr. Brigadier Gordon Kerr was the head of the British Army's Force Research Unit in Northern Ireland, which was a secret unit which was actually dedicated to orchestrating and training and directing the Loyalist terror campaign, not the Republican terror campaign, the Loyalist terror campaign. So it was believed that they were involved in the assassinations of Rosemary Nelson and Pat Finucane. Pat Finucane's centre in Belfast is one of those people that are very critical of British public inquiries. They're pushing for a public inquiry into the murder of Pat Finucane and other bad things that happened in Ireland, but they don't want the British to be doing it because they're Irish. Brigadier Gordon Kerr was investigated by Sir John Stevens of the Metropolitan Police. Again, a 14-year investigation, not just him, but of course his whole network. And Stevens went to Jackson, who was the head of the army at that stage, and said, look, your man is a terrorist and he's going to have to stand trial. Guess where he is now, folks? He's disappeared, originally to Beijing, to be a British military attaché in Beijing, and now he's in Iraq, running something called the Joint Services Group. And again, another mysterious kind of group that nobody knows what it is or what it does. I would suggest to you that it probably has quite a lot to do with the two SAS boys that were arrested by the Iraqi police in Basra after they tried to shoot their way through a roadblock and kill an Iraqi police officer. They said that the SAS boys were carrying a bomb. The British denied it, but the Iraqi authorities said there was a bomb on board. Okay, that may or may not be true, but the Iraqi authorities said there was a bomb on board. So now we've got the British authorities linked to all of these different false flag terrorist attacks. So of course the first thing that comes into your mind is this another one of those? I'll try and be brief because I just want to finish by mentioning some stuff about 7/7. There was a warning given to Netanyahu, who was visiting London that day. That wasn't covered in the film, but the Israeli embassy said that he had a warning, and that's why he didn't go out into the city when the bombs were going off. Now that's very strange, isn't it, for somebody to have a warning like that? They've since rowed back on that. It's very confusing whether he did or didn't have a warning. But the only reason I asked whether he had a warning, because on September the 11th, 5 Israelis were arrested by the authorities in the US for photographing the event. They were caught. They were standing on top of a van with a video camera, and as the first plane hit, they were videoing it, and then they clapped each other's hands and cheered. And somebody noticed them, and they gave the number of the van to the local police, and the local police got them. Yeah. Now, they went on television in Israel when they eventually were released, saying, well, we weren't doing anything, we were just documenting the event. How do you document a surprise attack unless you know what's going on? Okay? So that's why we were suspicious about Netanyahu's warning on 7/7. Now, this whole nexus of terror has been around for a long time. So it may very well be that this attack isn't one of those kind of attacks. But the other attacks still are. We know that the state, the Israeli state, the British state, the American state, the Russian state, engages in these kind of activities. And I'm sure many of you from the subcontinent will know that in Pakistan and India, it's not been unknown for these kind of things to occur. In fact, pretty common. The Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence Agency seems to be pretty good at this kind of game.